Today's lesson is a very important one, and it's about coil parameters in relation to the type of flaws that you're trying to detect. Now, in case you haven't figured it out by now, if you're looking for tiny cracks, you have to use tiny coils. Because if you're looking for tiny cracks and you use a coil that's too thick or too wide or too long, it's going to have a very difficult time finding the tiny cracks because it tends to just wash right over them. You can kind of think it similar to pulsed eddy current in that pulsed eddy current can go deep, great. You know, it can go through many inches of insulation and find huge problems in carbon steel below it, but it's not going to find those hairline cracks or those tiny cracks. So you have to consider, what type of instrument are you using? In this case, we are using the Nortec 2000D, the workhorse of the military, and its older brother, the 2000D Plus. The only real difference with the one on the right is that you have color display. However, the one on the left's got a bigger display and it's brighter. So it's all about preference. I sell them both if you're interested. Anyway, I have a copper nickel tube here, and this is the one I've had in a few demonstrations. This one's got such problems you can see right through it because I made some huge holes. I mean, those are like 3/8 of an inch holes. Followed by just a bunch of smaller probes. Now, the reason you see all these shiny spots on the tube is because the encircling coil I'm going to use with the Nortec 2000 on the left, the fill factor is so tight that even the tiniest burr from the drilling process would not allow me to insert the tube through the encircling coil. So I had to make sure that it was nice and smooth on the outside. What you may have gathered from that is that the fill factor is extremely tight. You can't get any better than that. And actually in real life, this would be too high of a fill factor. A fill factor of 1 or 100% is not practical because that means the encircling coil is 100% filled by the tube. If that was the case and there was no air gap whatsoever, you wouldn't even be able to move it. It'd be stuck. So even in factory or tube mill installations where they're doing, production tubing inspections through encircling coils, you might have 90% fill factor, maybe even 95% if they get super aggressive. But typically anywhere around 80-85% is considered good. Fill factor doesn't really have a strict code requirement. It's usually, the requirement is that you got to take the 100% hole signal from your tube and you got to make it at least 50% of the screen height. Whatever fill factor you use to achieve that is sort of up to you. Okay, so the first point I'm going to make, look at how wide this coil is. Do you think it's going to find these big, wide holes? You better believe it, because the coil is only about, and the coil's not as wide as the plastic fixture, but even if it's half that wide, the ratio from the hole size to the coil width is not going to be that huge. Maybe it's a 4-to-1 ratio tops. You'll be able to find these big flaws super easy. However, when I get down to the other end of the standard, the flat bottom hole diameters, not only are they pretty shallow, but they become increasingly smaller in diameter. The shiny spots aren't the diameter. That's just where I buffed off the tube. But some of these are down to like maybe 3 or 4 millimeters across. So that's going to be very small for this wide of a coil. If you look at the instrument settings for this particular tube and these testers, they're both set to 20 kilohertz. The phase angle is both set to 284 degrees. The gain is both at 87 dB. Probe drive voltage is high on both. And the instrument performance does not change greatly between these two testers. Now, just to give you a little bit of anticipation, what am I going to use to contrast that super wide encircling coil that we know is too big for the small flaws? we're going to be using this Corstar barnacle scraper inside bobbin probe. The fill factor for this probe is about the same as it is for the encircling coil. I can barely get the probe to pass through the tube freely. So that's going to be excellent for detection, not so great for driving the probe if I'm going through lots and lots of this tubing. Any small dent would restrict passage of the probe. But for this experiment, it's perfect because we can take fill factor variability out of this performance equation. So the first thing we're going to do is start off with the Nortec 2000D on the left. This one takes 2 batteries, by the way. This one only takes 1 battery. This one's heavier because of the 2 batteries. This one's a little bit lighter. Now, let me insert. See how I almost got to force it in there. Let's start off on the small end. That way I don't have to keep clearing my screen, right? Because you're going to go from small to big flaws. I'm going to null it in the end of the tube. The first thing I have is 4 20% flat bottom holes drilled 90 degrees apart around the circumference. And those are about, I don't know, maybe 5 millimeters in diameter. Okay, so there's some metal missing there. That's cool. Now as I keep moving along down this standard, that's the first big hole there. That hole is about, I don't know, what's that, 6-7 millimeters across? That's a pretty big one. Those are pretty big too. Well, I didn't know the performance was this great on these. We're going to make an adjustment on the fly here because sometimes you have to do that when you're doing these experiments. You have to improvise on the spot. Got to be able to think on your feet. Just like when you're speaking in front of a large group of people. That terrifies people, right? Okay, I'm bringing, you know, the fear of public speaking is feared by most people. And for the population, fear of public speaking is a fear even below fear of dying by fire. So people are pretty terrified of it. All right, I've adjusted my gain down to 75 dB for both. Now, for the encircling coil, I'm just going to start scanning some of these flaws. Okay, the amplitude doesn't start to get really big. First, let's see what that flaw is. That hole right there is almost a 1/4 inch, and it's 100% through a hole, 1/4 inch across. So that gives us, what, 3 divisions? Yeah, I can see it. I mean, hopefully you can detect one that big, right? But the next one is like 3/8 of an inch hole. I sees that just fine, right? And we got some massive ones at the end where I've drilled like 2 or 3 around the circumference. But we're going to use this first hole here as a reference. That's the one we're going to be doing our comparisons to, right? So 2.5 divisions. 2.5 divisions on this coil that's probably a 1/4 inch wide on the inside. All right, I would say that performance was pretty lame. Now, using similar settings on a similar instrument, we're going to use a bobbin probe. And we're going to stick that inside. Now, one thing to note about this bobbin probe, maybe where can you see it? There, maybe you can see it if you got good eyes. That black part towards the left end of the probe has it's got a differential coil set there, so it's got 2 sets of windings. Or is it one set? One pair of windings. 60 mils wide, separated by 60 mils. So smaller coils can find smaller flaws easier, right? Keep in mind, fill factor is the same. So I'm going to put the bobbin probe. I'm impressed at how clean this data is on the Nortec 2000D too. Probably just as clean on the other one, but I just have to change the adapter. All right, so I'm pulling inside the tube. Now, what's different about this one is that you were looking at absolute signals on the left, on the Nortec 2000 with the encircling coil. And on the right, because I don't have the right sort of adapter or whatever, you're going to see differential signals. So really, that's just going to be the absolute signal over here on the left times 2. So we'll just take half the amplitude when we figure out if these things are comparable or not in performance. So the first thing is going to be the 420s. Nice. Look at that phase lag. Because it's an inside bobbin probe, right? It's going to have more phase lag. I'm just going to start going through some of the smaller ones. That's got less phase lag. So that means it's not quite as deep. That one's not quite as deep. They're getting shallower by the minute. Okay, now we got some that are a little bit deeper. You can see right here. There's a little bit deeper again, but I changed they're a little bit deeper. Oh yeah, the diameter of the drill bit is smaller. That's why I have less amplitude. And then we get to a bigger one. All right, is that a hole? It's dark in here, so I can't really tell. But what do you think about the performance of this coil so far? Number one, the data is a lot cleaner. That's where we start getting into our big catastrophic holes on this end. All right. Now that data is so clean. I'm impressed. But remember, we're going to look at the reference hole. That's going to be this one right here. I'm keeping the gain settings the same. And I got to figure out where that coil is going to hit. So it's going to be about right there. This is what you got to do when you do tube pull reports and you cut tubes apart and you're trying to find flaws after a tube's been dissected. You got to make a lot of reference and measurements like this. But luckily, I can even see the coil when I put the probe inside the tube, probably. Let's try to get it in there. It's a tight fit. Okay, let's see, where's the coil? There's the coil right there. It's about 3 inches away. Now it's about an inch away. Now it's right under the hole, so I'm going just past the hole, and I'm going to hit erase. Look at that null point, dead center. That's the signal from this almost 1/4 inch wide hole using much smaller coil width. Okay, so remember how I said over on the left, when we went past the same signal with the encircling coil, it was about 2.5 divisions. How many divisions do you think that is? I mean, I would say each lobe is at least 100% screen height. We can figure that out by changing the position of our null point. Let's take it up. And then it's over 100% screen height just for that one lobe. You know? I mean, I'd have to crank my gain down quite a bit just to be able to get that thing to come on the screen. Look at how low I got to take my gain. Let's go down to like 50. Have to hit null, right? Gotta null it. Nulling's your friend. I changed my position, so don't forget about that. I gotta change my null position back to 50% of the screen so we can get a more realistic impression. Nulling and erasing. Which one is it right here? Hold on. Directly under that hole. Here I'm going to hit erase and null. Ready? Ready? Erase. I had to bring my gain down to what? 58.8. So I had to drop it almost 20 dB. Because remember, this was 2.5 divisions, and each one of these lobes is about 2.5 divisions. I had to drop it almost over, actually it's, just about 20 dB to get the same performance. So basically the 2000D, not really the 2000D that was victorious here. It was using the bobbin probe with a much smaller coil diameter. So the takeaway from this lesson should be, when you're designing your test system, it's not only important to use the right tester and the right test frequencies, but almost one of the most critical parameters is using coils with the right orientation and the right coil size for the type of flaw and the size of flaw that you want to detect. End of lesson.